I like this lighting. It's like me just against the darkness. So dramatic. Anyway, there's a pattern that I think if you get in your head this structure and start seeing it places similarly to the idea of the Hegelian synthesis, thesis, antithesis, and both of them combined into a synthesis, it will help you in life. So it's this of like concentric circles. And this is the same thing if you're familiar with Jonathan Pageau or just with his symbolism in general, like the cosmic mountain. It's the same image. So it applies to the state of like you being directly immersed in God versus thoughts and feelings and perceptions and the whole external cosmos and other people. It applies to the kind of primitive / paradise type state of society versus modern society with all of its complications and things that have been added on. It applies to childhood or the idealized idea of childhood versus adulthood with all of its additions and complications. You can see this pattern temporally as kind of we start here and we tend to fall to here. Or you can see it all at once as like this center is the life and the heart and the source of all of this. And in moving out here to more detail and more particularity and more complication, you don't necessarily have to lose the heart. So a very plain example, I guess, is with your body and then clothing. Obviously, both of those exist. Both of them are good. You kind of need both. The body comes first, though. It's certainly the more important one, and it gives form and reason and meaning to the clothing. And if you are like so obsessed, I guess, with your clothes that, I don't know, your body totally disappears under all these little clothes that you have on, and you're not like getting sun, and you're not like washing yourself, and you're not like eating, because all you do all day is like mess with your fashion, that's bad for both. And that would be like the fall, where you do lose the center. So, first of all, with childhood, the ideal, or like a baby or a child, it's this pure apprehension of the world, right, with nothing between, no thoughts really conscious, no like words, no like analysis and all this guilt and stuff. The child is open and vulnerable and dependent and totally innocent, and sees a person's face smiling, just like smiles back, and is unhappy and just cries. And then with this fall into adulthood, you lose that innocence in return for knowledge and more abilities in the world. You get cluttered by all of these habits and frames in this worldview. So like, instead of seeing another person and just like seeing their face and smiling and running up to them and hugging them like a kid will, you're categorizing them. You're like, okay, this person's of like this social class and I know them from here and they're probably thinking this about me and I have all these routines in my head that I can go through to be polite to them. And you're not even really seeing that person as a person, and then everything is routine, and it gets boring, and your whole life gets caught up in like work, and you just don't have the childhood excitement and like your imagination and your emotions are just like all dull. And that's the prototypical like fall into adulthood, and from innocence to knowledge. Similarly, with the idea, kind of paradisiacal idea of like the primitive life in the garden. Basically, you're naked, you're at the mercy of the elements, eating from just what provides itself, and totally experiencing creation just in the moment. It rains, and you're in the rain, and you're drinking from the water that's from the rain, and that's feeding whatever plants are growing, and yeah. And then the fall into society, you we lose that harmony with the cosmos in return for, survival and control and power, greater ability, and greater knowledge. It's the same movement. As Jonathan Pajot puts it, the garments of skin. So language, clothes, houses, writing. Writing is a big one. Tools, machines, the internet, virtual reality, all of these. And it's always inevitable, the way that the world has happened, that we should develop these things, but they put things right between us and between that pure experience of nature. And in the same way, when you're in a state of complete unity of yourself and God, which for the record, I haven't achieved this yet, so I'm speaking from the testimony of others and my limited experience of things that follow the same pattern. You're completely immersed in God and conscious only of Him, with no rational thoughts, no images in your mind, no senses, no individuality, just utter bliss. And however, we fall from there into the cosmos, both the macrocosmos and then the microcosmos of the individual human being. So falling from that unity, undifferentiated unity, into particularity. I exist, be out of, exist out of. Apparently that's the etymology of it. Anyway, I exist as myself, and then I have these thoughts and these feelings and sensations, and then there's all of these things around me, and all of this kind of splits up that unity of God in this and separates me from God. So that's the fall view of all of this. And it's really quite fatalistic in the end, because then you have to advocate, you categorize all of this stuff as bad. And you're like, well, that's all a dilution of the original purity of what is. Shut up. Lighting? No. And so we should just get back here. Get back to childhood, get back to nature, get back to absolute immersion in God, pure and simple. Anything short of that is a fall. And basically, all of this is connected with time. I gotta talk about time. It's complicated. I'm thinking about it. All this connected with time, as in linear time, history and time passing and things changing. So no experience of really time as development or progression but just the eternal moment where nothing really changes. Anyway, however, if society destroys all of societal structure and just immerses us back in nature, we will die. And two, what would actually happen is we would just fall into chaos, fight each other, and kill each other, because inside of ourselves we have those garments of skin. We are not children anymore. So if we go one step further, you can also see this whole structure as God, the human being, and the writer, society, or the cosmos. The human being, the cosmos, and society. That it also applies there. Anyway, so we can't just destroy society. So then if we go a step further and we say, okay, we all lie down and just stare around and blink and act like babies again, we will die. And also it won't work, because we're not children anymore. We have all of this internal structure that we develop as we grow up. So if we go a step in further and I, ascend through the heights of contemplation, clear everything out, concentrate myself, simplify myself, am entirely immersed in God and unconscious of anything else, I can only maintain that state for a short time, or I will die, because the other particular stuff, and my individuality and my body and the other people and the rest of the world, those things still do exist. So what we need in order to live in the fullness of reality, without kind of this forever yearning to get back to the purity simplicity of the center, or rather, without a completely unachievable yearning, and kind of just having to make this bargain between like, well, I really should be here, but I'll accept to be here because I gotta live. Anyway, what we need is the redemption, basically, and what Christ did. The symbol of this being the crown of thorns, the thorns being the symbol of what's entirely on the margin, which he put on his head and brought into the very center. So Christ doesn't just say, well, all this is bad, come back to the center. He says, all this I will bring back, and connect back. Because remember, this is, the other way to look at this is the center, the heart, or God, the individual person in their childish simplicity, and / society in its, you might say, like, primitive, I really shouldn't use that word, it's politically incorrect or whatever, but you know what I mean. Paradise, like Garden of Eden state. That's the source of all these other things. And this movement of the fall, right, away from God into individuality, into particular things, and into society, is the same movement that God himself makes in creating and bringing to be the world. But when God's doing it, or when it's connected to still connected to the source, and still connected to God, and still connected to life, is not a bad thing. It is in fact a good thing, and it's a development and a free, like, artistic expression and play almost of just all of what's potential in God, or what's potential in an individual person, or what's potential in the world or a society. So it's all in, like, the attitude, and it's all in whether you're connected to the center. And if you remain connected to the center, this movement is not a fall. It's a, I guess you'd say, development or expression, creation. But if you're cut off, then it does become a fall. Anyway, so, through spurts of, like, cutting out everything else and, like, praying and just being aware of God, the closer that I get to maintaining all the time that, like, pure awareness of him in my heart, the more that my own, when I, like, come back down, as it were, the more that my own individuality and, like, the particular things of life don't separate me from him anymore. I can have both, as it were. And the more that I periodically kind of break down / see through all of these habitual, like, dead kind of adult typical, like, structures, the more that even within my adult life in society or whatever, I am rediscovering kind of that fresh, spontaneous emotion of childhood. I can go out in the rain and, like, feel it and be happy, and I'm not thinking about anything else. Something's funny, and oh man, at this point I just can so easily go off into this hysterical laughter because it's funny, and like, there's nothing else in my head, I'm just laughing. Children are innocent, but innocence, the thing about it is it can be spoiled when knowledge from without enters in too early, as it were, and it can spoil innocence. But now what I have is purity, which is all of the good things about innocence, but also integrating knowledge so that you can't spoil purity. So if society would do this, the society would become the kingdom, and technological innovation wouldn't destroy and separate the cosmos and break apart the earth like we're seeing, and separate us from the earth like we're seeing, and separate us from each other like we're seeing. It would enrich and it would harmonize everything. This is a simplified version of one way to look at the basic structure of all of reality. And yeah, I think if you can get it in your head and start seeing it. There's the rain. Yeah, it will help you to understand a lot about life and to take the right attitude toward these things. Both seeing that, yes, technically, XYZ is a separation from the original primordial indistinction and unity and purity, but also, if you look at it from below, essentially, cut off from the source, then that's a separation and it's bad. But once you're up there and once you're reconnected with the source, with God, essentially, you can look at it from above, as it were, and then you see, oh, these things are God's self-expression, and they're good.